Got to the other side, and when I stepped on it, it just collapsed underneath me. The world just kind of went mad in a split second. It was quite bizarre. But I was basically just in sort of survival mode. At points during that, I thought I might not make it.
Hi, and welcome to Lives Less Ordinary on the BBC World Service YouTube channel with me, Asya Fuchs. Today, a caver trapped for 54 hours deep underground after a horrific fall. George Linnane was enjoying a routine trip in the Brecon Beacons in Wales when his world changed in an instant. After a freak accident a mile inside the cave, George was left with multiple injuries, and it would take an army of volunteers to get him out alive. Well, George, thank you so much for being here and coming in today. We really appreciate it.
No worries.
So you are an experienced caver. What about the sport appeals to you? You know, why are you drawn to it?
I was a scuba diver first and a caver afterwards. So I've been diving for a very long time. And I got into more, sort of more and more challenging types of diving as time went on. I have quite severe ADHD, so I have a very busy mind. I find that if I'm quite an all or nothing sort of person. So if I find something that, I really like, I can become very, very engrossed in it. Most of the time when I'm up here on the surface doing daily life, my mind is going, a mile a minute about anything and everything sometimes. But when I'm underground, and particularly when I'm underwater, all that quietens down because you need to focus on the here and now. You just have to, and that's it.
Do you remember the first, cave system you ever explored?
I do, yeah. The Dos Ojos system in Mexico. I was on holiday there and I did a guided dive, and that's where I decided that I wanted to become a sort of qualified cave diver. And the first cave that I ever did any sort of dry caving in, so non-diving, was a cave called Ogof Funandy in South Wales.
I just keep trying to avoid
Ogof Funandy.
Ogof Funandy. Could
you say it better than I do?
Oh God, no. Yeah, what does it look like? Why is it particularly beautiful or striking, or is it?
I mean, OFD, which you can.
Geez, you should have said that from the beginning.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, OFD is a very extensive cave system, and there's a lot in there. There's tens of kilometres of passage in there. My favourite part of it is the active streamway, which is it's the underground river. It's the sort of the part of the cave that's still very much alive at the times that it is safe to be in that bit of the cave. There's diving to be had down there, and there's just streamways to explore. It's very striking, and to a diver like me, that's the part of the cave where the fun is. That's where the water is. It's where the diving is. It's where the life is.
So November 6th, 2021.
That's the one.
That's the one. That's the big day. You and two friends, Mark and Mel, you set off to the Brecon Beacons to explore a cave system, the one you mentioned before, whose name I'm going to butcher even though I've been practicing, Ogof Funandy.
Very good effort. Well done, yeah.
Well, close enough. Where you've been before, it was going to be a routine trip for an experienced caver like you. What was the plan for the day?
The plan was, as you say, to undertake a routine caving trip in through the Cwm Dor entrance, which is the middle entrance to the cave system, and it's very close to the caving club. So nice and easy, very short walk over. Mark is very, very knowledgeable, sort of route finding wise in that cave system. He knows it like the back of his hand, so no problem there. And we were just going to make our way up into an area called the Smithy and then the Upper Smithy, which I had never visited before, and I don't think Mel had either. Just to have a look around it, really. It's one of those places that it's not really on the way to anywhere. It's somewhere that you kind of walk past a bunch of times to do other trips, but unless you make a point to go in there, you won't ever end up there.
And how long was the whole trip meant to take?
We were only meant to be in there about 5 hours or so.
Yeah. And just before we move on to what happened, I wonder if you could describe. I just found them quite striking, the images of like how you enter the cave. It's like a metal door and some rocks.
That's right. Yeah, it is a metal hatch with a padlock on it. So you need a key from the caving club to get in. These doors, by the way, you can open them without a key or anything from the inside, so you can get out. Just in case anyone was wondering.
For someone who's never, been inside a cave, who's never had to crawl through this, very small, tight space, how would you describe it? Like, what are you actually seeing? What are you doing with your body? What's it like?
Well, it's not all small and tight. We do the small tight stuff, but it's generally to get to something better. But while you're doing that stuff, obviously you can't see a whole heap except for what's right in front of you because it's a small space. Or some of these routes are what we call flat out crawls, which means you're pretty much commando crawling. So you're on your front and your chest is on the floor and your back is on the ceiling. So you kind of just move however you can. Sometimes you are really inching along a tunnel. How do you feel while you're doing that? I guess it can be a little bit unnerving, I suppose. You get used to it. They can take a bit of time to get through and you kind of want to get to the good stuff.
Is it scary?
I have been scared, yeah. Depends on how tight something is. In order to find what your limit is, sometimes you find yourself testing limits, and sometimes that means failing at something, which can result in a bit of a scary moment, which you then back off from, and that's just kind of part of it, really.
So what is back off from? That means go back where you came from, go back the other way.
Pretty much.
Right. And I mean, how are you feeling that day as you get deeper and deeper into the cave?
Fine. Normal. Absolutely normal, yeah.
Except that it didn't end up being exactly that, right? Something goes wrong. You know what happened?
We'd explored all of it. We'd kind of been down all the major passages and seen what we wanted to see. We'd taken a few light-hearted photos, and we'd turned to start exiting. On our way in, we had walked across a rock bridge which is spanning a rift. A rift is a very tall, narrow passage in a cave. It had been walked on many times before. There were footprints all over it. I think people had been there the previous week. It wasn't. We weren't exactly out on a limb here. All three of us had walked across it to get to where we were. On the way back, Mark walked across it first and got to the other side. And when I stepped on it, it just collapsed underneath me. I fell about 10 meters, so which is quite a long way onto solid rock, as you can imagine. I didn't really know what was happening at the time. It was all a bit. The world just kind of went mad in a split second. It was quite bizarre. I kind of had an inkling that something had happened, but I was basically just in sort of survival mode.
Like shock as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I had no idea what had happened. I felt like I was, my sort of legs were going in midair and my arms were going, and I felt like I was clambering up a pile of rocks at one point, and maybe even winning quicker than it was falling, if that makes sense. I think what was actually happening was I was just falling with a big pile of rocks, pretty much. And then we hit the floor and everything went black. And I passed out for a couple of minutes, probably made some groaning noises, I imagine, which alerted Mark and Mel to the fact that I wasn't dead, which I think they thought I was. At which point Mark, who's a very, very good climber, engineered a way to get down this rift without becoming a casualty himself. It was obvious to me that I was badly injured. I knew I'd fallen. I knew I was in trouble.
Broken leg,
I knew I was badly
shattered jaw, ribs, a collapsed lung, and more.
All that kind of stuff. Yeah, yeah. There was a bit of a list. At this point, it was obvious to me that there was the jaw was broken and there was kind of teeth rattling around and there was a taste of blood. When I tried to move, my leg was agony, so that was obviously broken. I had quite a lot of pain on my front, sort of the top half of my torso at the front, which I now know was 3 broken ribs and lungs that weren't very happy with me, a ruptured spleen and a dislocated collarbone. So I think that I fell vertically down, snapped the leg, and then fell forward. And as I landed, I was kind of my head was below my feet. So I was on like a slanted pile of rocks, which is probably what used to be the rock bridge. Yeah. And all my weight was sort of like, forward onto that broken stuff.
Did you have to reposition yourself to be right side up? Was that something you tried to do? Did that feel like important to your survival?
Not immediately. So Mark sort of, checked me over and it was obvious to him, some of the injuries, and it was obvious that he needed to go and get help, right? So that's what he did. I still remember it. He said, "I've got to go." I said, "I know, mate." I said, "Be quick." And he was out of there like a shot. Meanwhile, Mel is still up there. Yeah. She hasn't been able to cross a rock bridge because there isn't one anymore. And she's terrified to move in case she knocks more rocks down on top of me or ends up down there with me. And she started talking to me to try and keep me conscious and sort of, with us and on this planet.
So meanwhile, Mark has rushed up
Mark-
to the surface to get help.
Mark is exiting at this point as quickly as his legs will carry him. Yeah.
Mel's chatting to you.
Mel's
just
chatting to me.
Keep you awake to do something.
Yeah, she was just
what's
talking
to you about.
Just anything and everything, really. Just whatever she could think about. I don't know, life and dogs and work and everything and anything. Just to just to try and keep me talking.
And I mean, were you able to say stuff back to her?
On and off. So there was a bit of a gap in the conversation while I tried to move myself. Well, did move myself. I didn't feel like I could stay with all my weight on this broken stuff. Yeah. I wanted to try and find somewhere where I could sort of turn myself over at least, maybe sit up. And that wasn't going to happen where I was. So I put my arms out and I sort of felt either side of me, and I felt a wall either side. So I wasn't going to have any luck there. If I was going to find some space, I needed to go forward. So I started dragging myself forward. As you can imagine, I'm dragging a broken leg behind me. So I'm screaming with agony doing this, and Mel goes quiet, as you can imagine. Just listening to all this screaming coming out of this hole. And so I flipped over, in as controlled a manner as I could. But this leg kind of flops over, bounces off the wall, as you can imagine. More screaming, more shouting, etc., etc. But I did then manage to prop myself up against this rock and kind of calm myself a bit.
Did you tell Mel what you were trying to do?
I did warn her, and she told me not to do it. She's like, I don't think that's a good idea. I said, I do. And just did it. It needed doing. I couldn't just stay on my front with my head below my legs. Anyway, so once that was all over, then she carried on talking to me.
Was that a comfort to you, the conversation?
It was kind of a bit of both. So I kind of flipped between two mental states while this was happening. There was times when she was talking to me and I was like trying to answer back as best I could and sort of stay with it and do as I was told. She's telling me to wiggle my toes and do this and do that. But all that takes quite a lot of energy when you're in a state like I was. And so you get tired and your mental state starts to slip and you start feeling, I can't do this. I'm just going to stop responding and I'm just going to let myself slip off, and whatever happens. You stop caring, and then you catch yourself doing that and you think, no, I'm not. I ain't going out like this. I'm going to fight this thing. And you come back round again and you start responding. You just go around this loop over and over. Or I did go around this loop over and over and over again. And this went on for about 3 hours.
Meanwhile, we've got Mark on the surface looking for help. And I mean, we should just say here that, if you get in trouble in a cave, like emergency workers aren't going to be able to help you.
No,
there's no firemen. They don't have the skills.
Not to get that far into a cave.
So it's going to be other cavers who are going to come to rescue you.
Absolutely. Cavers rescue cavers. Cavers are the only people that can rescue cavers. You're dead right.
At what point do you realize that help is actually on its way, that Mark has made contact with South and Mid Wales Cave Rescue Team and they're coming to help you?
I knew he'd manage it. I have complete faith in Mark. We've been through thick and thin together, and we have a lot of trust in each other. But I heard rescue coming about 3 hours after he left. I heard voices in the distance. It wasn't the first time I'd heard voices in the distance, but this was the first time that they weren't imaginary. Mark wasn't with them, but yeah, I had the first sort of advanced first aiders, they're called, turned up along with some rescue team members.
What did they say to you when they got there?
By this point, I think I was kind of starting to slip away a little bit mentally, but I do remember them checking me over. They offered me some pain relief in the form of intramuscular morphine, which they gave me a good shot of, which did nothing. Nothing, because I was I was cold by this point, and intramuscular things rely on a blood flow to spread it through your muscles and through the rest of your body. Well, the colder you are, the less well that works. So if you've got someone that's really cold, it doesn't really do a lot. They gave me a second shot, and that didn't really do the business either.
And in those first few hours, I mean, do you realize how much time has elapsed? Are you keeping track of the time? Or
Not a clue. A lot more time elapses than you think.
And you said that, you were on strong pain medication, so it did start working eventually, or they gave you other meds?
It started working eventually, but this wasn't intramuscular. So once they got me out of the main drag of the Cwm Dor part of the cave, bigger passage, and they were able to set up a tent. They put me in order to start, and a doctor and a couple of candles in order to start A, raising my body temperature, and B, put someone in contact with me who was able to start stabilising my condition. They put an IV cannula into my vein, and were able to start giving me, more hospital grade sort of drugs, if you like. Probably saved my life It definitely saved my spleen, but it probably saved my life because it would have stopped me from bleeding out internally, which was a concern and was happening, I think.
In the early hours of you being, trapped underground, you described being between these two states, either, giving up or to keep going. What is it that gets you to keep going? Is it thoughts of family and friends above ground? Like, how does that side kind of win over?
I think a part of it is the thought of, you know, as you suggest, people on the outside, a partner, family, friends, maybe never getting to do certain things again that you enjoy, that kind of stuff. But also just for me, an inner stubbornness. I'm a very determined, driven person, and I think I found some inner strength whilst I was lying there waiting for rescue to come with Mel talking to me. At points during that, I thought I might not make it, but once help arrived, I always thought that they would get me out.
You trusted them.
I did.
Yeah,
I did, and I had some faith, and I think that was, having a positive mental attitude is really important. There is a very strong link, obviously, between your mind and your body, and if you believe something can happen, then, I'm not saying you can make the impossible impossible, of course you can't, but you definitely improve your chances a lot.
At points during the rescue, you're still, lucid enough to be cracking jokes.
Yeah.
How do you keep your nerve in the moments that you are lucid, in the moments that you are aware of what's going on?
Once they got my medical situation sort of stable and under control, I was kind of more lucid after that, albeit on a lot of strong pain medication.
And I guess the other thing to be said is that, a lot of these cavers who are down there, some of them are probably familiar faces to you, people who might not necessarily be friends, but people you'd seen in the community.
Yeah, that was it. That was the first thing I noticed, really, as I was becoming more lucid, was that I started recognizing faces, people that I knew from the local caving scene, but it wasn't lost on me that these faces were from increasingly further away. We can only have been about halfway through the rescue before I was seeing people from all the way up in Yorkshire. So, it was quite apparent to me that I'd caused quite a major fuss here, and, and that people were coming from all over the country to pitch in.
Was it reassuring at first to see, to see friends?
Very much so, yeah. I might have felt a little bit guilty at one point, I suppose, but that was quickly replaced by just gratitude. As you say, I became more lucid and my mood improved to the point where I was having some quite good banter with friends that I knew on rescue teams at some points.
Do you remember what sorts of jokes you were making?
Not really. I remember one or two bits. There's a guy called Michael Thomas who taught me to cave dive, and his face appeared over my stretcher at one point. And I don't know what I said to him, but I know I was quite cheeky. Whatever it was, I just kind of instinctively knew to be cheeky to this face because it's Mike. And he laughed, and I laughed, and then I looked at him and I went, "By the way, who are you again?" I was on so much morphine, I didn't know who he was. I just kind of instinctively knew to be cheeky to this guy. And yeah, apparently I was sort of cracking jokes, and I was reeling off lists of messages that I wanted them to send out of the cave to people. The day after this caving trip, I was meant to be scuba diving with a lady I know called Christine. So I wanted a message to be sent to her to say that I won't be meeting you where I said I'd be meeting you tomorrow.
I thought it'd be things like I love you, my family.
Well, we're getting to that.
Okay, sorry.
There was. On Monday, my car was meant to be going in for an MOT, so I wanted a message to the MOT guy saying, "Don't take my car because my partner's going to be needing that." And yes, I did also try and send out an "I love you" to my partner as well.
At the time, you said you weren't fully aware, of the scale of this rescue operation. Your only indication was that, the faces you were seeing were from people further afield than just, Wales.
That's right.
That you started to see more and more unfamiliar faces. What have you since learned about how big this effort really was?
I know that it involved 10 separate rescue teams from all around the UK. I know that it included about 250 people underground and another 50 plus, I think, on the surface doing things like cave link communications, on the receiver end, cooking to keep feeding these rescuers so that they could go and get some sleep and get up and go back into the cave and carry on. There was a lot going on.
Yeah. How long was a shift?
How long was a shift? I think that some people were underground for 12 hours at a time, which is quite long. I've been underground for that length of time and more myself, and it's quite a long time to be underground.
Can you give us a sense of sort of the physical and logistical challenges of getting you out? Because you had to be strapped to a stretcher to kind of get you out of there. How did they get you out?
Initially, I was in quite a skinny rift, quite a narrow passage. So strapping someone to a stretcher, which is what was needed, and extracting me from that was quite difficult because it takes a few people to lift a stretcher. I weighed 83 kilos at the time, 75 now, but 83 at the time. And, so it's not just a case of one person at each end. You kind of need more people around it than that. But if you think about it in a thin passage, it's difficult to get more than just a person at each end. So they needed to find small people and use a bit of ingenuity. And it took a long time to get me out of there. I couldn't exit, or I couldn't be extracted the way that I'd come in because of the body size tubes. They wouldn't have physically got me through there on a stretcher. So I had to go the other way. Luckily, there's more than one exit from this cave system. There's 3. So that involves taking me down to an underground river, and then adding a floating element, so almost like lilos, specifically designed lilos, but lilos nonetheless that
What's
go around.
Lilo? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, a lilo is a. Imagine I'm lying on an inflatable bed in a swimming pool, sipping a cocktail.
Well, that sounds relaxing.
Yeah.
Not like what you were actually doing.
No, it really wasn't. But yeah, it's kind of like that. The lilo is the thing that you would be lying on. It's not just a case of sticking you on said lilo and then you float up the river. I mean, for starters, we have to go upstream, not downstream. So you're going against the flow. The water's not deep enough to just kind of, pull you up it floating on the surface. So, you're being lifted and moved, a matter of a few meters or sometimes even just a few feet at a time over and around obstacles, up climbs and cascades and little waterfalls. And it was quite a big exercise to get me up this streamway as far as what they call rescue pitch, which is a 30-foot cliff face, which has been rigged in the past specifically in case someone needs to be rescued from the cave. But rescue pitch gets quite narrow at the top. And so they can't go through with you, so they kind of have to leave you to it at that point and just, I think off they go and then you get pulled through. And I didn't think I was going to fit.
What did you think was going to happen to you?
Well, I don't know. Once I did make it to the top of rescue pitch, I was pulled up over the lip, placed on the floor, and I thought, great, I'm on easy street now. Because when you do this trip as a caver, when you go from Cwm Dor to top entrance, or top exit in this case, which is what we were headed for, it's a pretty straight run out from there. It doesn't take very long. The caving's not that hard. But it turns out that when you're on a stretcher being manhandled through these tunnels, it's not quite as easy as when you're just crawling through them as a sort of solo caver. So I was given some more medication and off we went.
So the people that were rescuing you, right, this was like an incredible coordinated effort. They all had to work together. It's people who might not necessarily know each other very well. Maybe they have seen each other in some caves here and there, but I mean, yeah, from your perspective on the stretcher, like, what did you appreciate the sort of teamwork and coordination that went into this?
Very much so, yeah. And that became particularly apparent in the last part of the rescue. The controllers had allowed pretty much anyone who had been involved up to that point who wanted to do another shift, allowed them back into the cave to do, like a final shift, if you like. Because the nature of the passages in that bit of the cave is they're quite big. You're able to form a bit of a human chain and make some real progress with the stretcher. And so I'm being passed down this big chain of people, person to person and person. And from my perspective, I just see this kind of sea of faces going past, if you know what I mean. And there were sort of comments and smiles and nods of respect and just little bits of communication that sort of went back and forth, not all of it verbal, and it was quite a nice moment actually. I almost enjoyed that part of the rescue.
What were you thinking and feeling as you were seeing all these faces?
A lot of gratitude, a little bit of impatience that I wanted to, I wanted this to be over now. I'm done with this stretcher. It'd be really nice to sort of get out of here. Problem with caves is the floor isn't flat, so you're always going around things and over things, and there's obstacles and stuff in the way, and it's can be a bit of a pain. It can be easier sometimes just to have a lot of stationary people passing it. I think that as we got close to the exit, there were probably conversations had to happen about how we were going to handle the potential media circus outside, all that kind of stuff. And then my final thought as we approached that hatch was, I really hope I fit, because it's not a very big hatch.
But did you? I guess you did.
Well, yeah.
Here now.
Here we are. Exactly that. Yeah. No, we did fit, and they knew I would fit. Obviously, they've done this before in rescue practices and whatnot, but at the time, I thought, is this going to fit? And it did. Yeah. And then we're outside.
Finally, 54 hours later, you get to the surface. You're above ground. What does that feel like?
It felt like Wales. So it was wet and windy.
Okay. But emotionally, what did it feel like?
Emotionally, I was really pleased to get out of there. Just really pleased to be out. There's media people there. There's mountain rescue people there. There's cave rescue people there, and there's a waiting Land Rover which I was bundled into the back of, and I was carefully placed in the back of actually, and then obviously carefully driven down the side of the mountain to a waiting ambulance. They cut all my caving kit off me, so all my, my caving oversuit and my undersuit and my wellies and all that kind of stuff. I said, never mind that, just chop all that off. So they did, just kind of threw it out the back door of the ambulance, rip it off, throw it out the door. Exactly. Job done, and off we went.
And, how long of a road to recovery has it been?
What I found recovering from this thing was that you can't just look at the end, because it seems to be very far away and kind of unobtainable, and like it's never going to come, and your progress at the start of this is very, very slow. So you've got to take the little wins as they come. And my first mission was this was November, end of November by the time I got out of hospital, and I just wanted to be able to eat my Christmas dinner with my teeth rather than sticking it in a blender. I've got broken jaw and whatnot. So it took me 4 weeks of literally training my jaw to be able to chew increasingly difficult things. I then started learning to walk again. I think my first walk was, the end of the driveway, and then a few hundred meters up the road, and then eventually 1 kilometer, and then 2 kilometers, and this kind of happened over a period of months. 4 or 5 months, I was able to get into a swimming pool, start slowly building up a little bit of fitness again by doing some swimming. 6 months later, I did my first scuba dive. 9 months later, I went back underground for the first time, and I just kind of took it from there. And I'd say
you went back caving.
Yes, I did.
Was that an easy decision? Is that you knew that you always knew you'd go back, or did it take some kind of consideration? I
always wanted to get back underground. I kind of made it my mission. And I decided this very, very early on while I was still in the hospital, that I made it my mission to not only get back underground and caving again, but to get strong enough that I could join the South Mid Wales Cave Rescue Team and, basically help the next poor soul that this happens to.
Why was that important to you, to join the rescue team?
I think it was a useful target for me for my recovery, but I also very much wanted to give back, I guess, Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't owe them anything. I didn't owe them any money. I didn't owe them a thing. As I said before, cavers rescue cavers. It's just what happens, right? Yeah. A really big element of why this story is interesting. It's not just that something unfortunate happened to me and I survived it. It's very much a story about a community pulling together and saving one of their own. It's kind of a happy good news story in a lot of ways.
Thank you so much, George, for sharing your story with us, and thank you for watching. I'm Asya Fuchs, and if you want more fascinating true life stories, make sure you're following Lives Less Ordinary wherever you get your podcasts, or you can find us here on the BBC World Service YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we love to hear from you, so leave your comments below. Take care.